Let's get into the SEC basketball tournament as I want to kind of break it down, talk through some of the games. I'm not going to go super in depth in all of the games, just want to talk about some dark horses, some games I think that will be key to watch. And then, just as a heads up, what's going to happen is I'm going to talk through who I think is going to win the SEC tournament and quickly predict each game by game here in this podcast. And then for every game that after every Alabama game, so Alabama's first game, and I'm gonna pop up the bracket here on the screen so that everyone can see it. Alabama does not play until Friday. They did get the double bye. They're going to be playing the winner of Florida and then the winner of Georgia Missouri. So Georgia Missouri winner will play Florida, and then the winner of that game will play Alabama. So if chalk holds, Alabama will be playing Florida in the late game on Friday night. So I'm not going to do a podcast preview of that Florida game. This episode here is going to serve as a little bit of a preview. I will do a shortened write-up if it is Florida or whoever it is for the SEC tournament, kind of breaking down some key points to watch. I probably will not do a full thread as we've played Florida twice, and I don't think it makes a ton of sense to go, player by player, but I will do a shortened, abbreviated breakdown of each team that Alabama will be playing in the SEC tournament as far as they make it. So I will be breaking that down. I'll release that on Substack, and then I will do a post-game recap here on the podcast as well as on YouTube. And then if Alabama wins this first game, say it's against Florida, then I will break down the Florida game and look ahead to the next game, because at that time we will know the future matchups. I just don't want to do a breakdown of a matchup that has not happened yet, of course. So let's talk through the bracket. So the top 4 seeds are set. It's Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Auburn. Those are the last 4 teams to have won an SEC tournament in the last 5 years. Alabama's won 2 of them. Everyone else in the top 4 seeds have won 1. This is going to be a huge tournament. For anybody that's not familiar with the tournament in Nashville, the lion's share of the turnout typically is from Tennessee and Kentucky fans. Those fans often will buy up tickets as soon as they drop, the beginning of the year, and will hold them hoping for their team to be playing on Championship Sunday as well as for any of the games. So with that in mind, that goes in 2 ways. If Tennessee or Kentucky get knocked out early, you will be able to get tickets for these games very cheap. If Tennessee and Kentucky are playing in your game, expect the tickets to be very expensive. And if Tennessee and Kentucky end up making the championship game, if chalk holds, assume that the get in the door price for that game to be $200 plus. Wouldn't shock me if it was over $300 to get in for that game, as those 2 fan bases are the ones that have been buying up tickets, getting ready for this tournament long before they even saw what the bracket looked like. So we're going to go through kind of each night of games very quickly and talk through who I think has a good shot of winning. So game 1 of the tournament is Vandy, Arkansas. I could really see this game going either way. I think that Arkansas is playing its best basketball currently. We saw that against Alabama. So I think that Arkansas winning that game is a very high likelihood. Musselman does a decent job when it comes to tournaments. They've talked about him making Elite Eights. I'm curious if Stackhouse, has something to say about that. At the end of the day, this tournament is in Nashville. It's not in Memorial Gymnasium, but this tournament is in Nashville, and Stackhouse has done a decent job in SEC tournaments. So I am curious to see how that goes. If I was to pick who I think is going to win that game, I would go Arkansas. I think that Arkansas has a really good shot of winning the game just due to the basketball that they're currently playing. Then in game 2, it's Missouri, Georgia. Missouri has not won an SEC game to this point. I honestly don't think they're going to start today in the SEC tournament, so I have Georgia winning that game. Then in game 3, we have Mississippi State versus LSU. I think that LSU just is so inconsistent that I think Mississippi State's defense has a really good job of being able to stop LSU's offense. And I have Mississippi State winning that game. Then in what I think potentially could be one of the better games of the tournament, we have Arkansas, South Carolina. This is a game that I've gone back and forth on. I think that Arkansas is playing better than their record indicates currently. However, I think that South Carolina is upset that they're the 5 seed. Obviously, tiebreakers are what they are, so that's why they're the 5 seed. But they're sitting at 13-5, and a lot of people are actually picking Arkansas to win this game. They're picking Arkansas to win game 1 and then beat South Carolina in game 2. So I actually have South Carolina winning that game to kind of prove the naysayers wrong, right? To prove people wrong, to prove that Lamont Paris is the coach that some people think he is. And, he won SEC Coach of the Year for a reason. Then you have Ole Miss A&M. I actually like Ole Miss to win that game. I don't know what it is, but there's something about Ole Miss's shot blocking and guard play and Chris Beard that I just think Ole Miss will knock off A&M, and we're going to hear, because A&M is not going to have a run in the tournament, we may hear some talks of Buzz Williams complaining that A&M doesn't make it into the tournament. That's something that I think has a real likelihood of happening. A&M and Mississippi State are the 2 teams in this tournament that have probably the most to lose, because if they don't win at least one game, their odds of making the NCAA tournament are not great. But I do think that for whatever reason, I think that Ole Miss wins this game. And that's just what my gut instinct says. There's a good chance A&M wins it, but I'm going to be picking Ole Miss in that one. And then in Florida, Georgia, I have Florida. I think that Georgia could give them a run for their money, but I just don't see them having the firepower. I think Florida wins the game. I think that Florida wins that game. Mississippi State, Tennessee, this is Tennessee's chance for revenge. Mississippi State did beat them in Starkville, but I don't think that Mississippi State has the firepower to do it a second time. I think that Mississippi State's free throw shooting down the stretch is going to cost them when it comes to March, when it comes to this tournament. And if they make the NCAA tournament, it's going to cost them in that one as well. The really poor free throw shooting is something that they cannot rely on when it goes down to the stretch and when it gets to be a really close game. And I just do not trust Mississippi State when it comes to a team that I think that they, potentially have a shot to beat, but I just don't think they have a chance against this one. Then it's South Carolina, Auburn. I actually have South Carolina winning this game to set up a rematch with Tennessee in the SEC semifinal. I have South Carolina beating Auburn. South Carolina, again, I put this on Lamont Paris. Put this on the team being, second guessed, thought down of for a large percentage of the season. They were picked to finish last in the SEC. He goes on to finish 13-5 in a 4-way tie for second. By seeding, ends up getting 5th. And I think that South Carolina, can beat this Auburn team. I do know that Auburn ran them out of the gym in Neville Arena a couple of weeks ago. However, Nashville is not Neville Arena. The people in that arena are not going to be cheering for Auburn. Quite frankly, they're probably not going to be cheering for South Carolina either. So I think this is going to be a situation where I think that South Carolina has a chance to kind of prove the doubters wrong. So I have South Carolina winning that game. And then in Ole Miss, Kentucky, I do have Kentucky winning. I think that Kentucky is on a hot streak, and I think that they are just – this is one of Cal's best offensive teams he's had in a very long while. And I think that they're peaking at the right time. So I do have Kentucky winning that game. Then in the Florida-Alabama game, I do think that Alabama gets revenge on the game from Gainesville. Alabama gets Latrell Wrightsell back. He actually can fully play in that game. I think that there's a decent chance that Rylan Griffin does play in the game with the rest that he's been able to receive. I think that Alabama has now seen positively and negatively what can happen. And I think that the reason they lost that game in Gainesville had as much to do with the letdown after the Tennessee game as it did to playing that game in Gainesville. Alabama did not play well on the road this year, and I think that that had a lot to do with that game. But I think that Alabama can beat Florida and that they will beat them going into that game. So that sets up a Tennessee, South Carolina, Alabama, Kentucky semifinals. And I think the winners of those games are Tennessee, Kentucky. So I actually do think chalk holds in terms of the top 2 seeds. I see Tennessee winning against South Carolina. I think that's a point where South Carolina's inability to stop Dalton Connect and inability to score with some of the better teams on their schedule at times is going to catch up to bite them. I know that Tennessee has some of those same issues as well, but I do think that Tennessee, for whatever reason, I think this team is one of Rick Barnes' best when it comes to scoring. So I do think that Tennessee can win that game. And then I have Kentucky beating Alabama. I think that Alabama has a very good chance of winning that game. There's just something about the matchup when it comes to Kentucky for me, when it comes to Reed Shepherd, when it comes to how Alabama defends the 3, when opposing teams can get out in transition. Alabama has had an issue with having shots blocked. We've talked about it this year, last year. And Kentucky is just a team that's set up with, multiple guys shooting over 40% from 3. They have a guy in Reed Shepherd that can really cause havoc on the ball handler. They have multiple shot blockers. The way that Kentucky runs its lineup, I think that can give Alabama some troubles. And I think that Kentucky knocks Alabama out of the SEC tournament. And then I actually have Kentucky winning the SEC tournament. As much as I think that this is Rick Barnes' best scoring team at Tennessee, I still don't trust its offense. I think that the Alabama game against Tennessee in Tuscaloosa was a good example that if Alabama had been able to make shots and the shots were open and the shots were there, Alabama wins that game. I think that Kentucky is not going to miss those shots. They will have the most fans in that arena. Even against Tennessee, I expect it to be 75-25 for fans in that arena. Kentucky by far travels the best to the SEC tournament, and I think that Big Blue ends up winning the SEC tournament for Cal's first SEC tournament win since 2018. Is there a chance they lose, even in game 1? Sure. However, I think for my money, I would actually bet on Cal to win the SEC tournament, as I think this is one of his best offensive teams yet. The scoring, the defense is getting better. They have the shot blockers and they have, some perimeter defense with Shepherd, like I talked about. But I think that this Kentucky team has what it takes to win this SEC tournament, and they are who I have picked to win it in Nashville.